Just 8 months ago, I came back to Rise of Kingdoms, establishing my account as one of the biggest hoarding accounts ever seen in Rise of Kingdoms history. It saved up almost 10,000 legendary commander sculptures, which I used to expertise 10 commanders. Used over 2,400 legendary materials to forge, refine, and iconic upgrade over 50 legendary equipment pieces, and finally I competed in 3 different KvKs to test myself. All of this was in preparation for this KvK. The KvK that would be the bloodiest, most insane KvK in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. The one that would shatter nearly every single record inside of the game. This is the story of how an ordinary player like myself managed to survive the deadliest Kingsland fight. This is a story of how I survived the greatest KvK in all of history when my Kingdom 2489 faced 1093.
No more problems, no more argue, no more asking who really are you. I know the real you know we feel you, you know he hears you, you know we with you. Straight from Beirut, Chicago, Beirut, Ukraine, we pray too. You pray, we pray too. Never too late for him, save you. This show, movie, cause no one can play you.
It was a Tides of War Ultimate KvK, hosting the 2 biggest and best kingdoms in the game. Starting with Fire Camp, it was 2489, my kingdom. This kingdom housed some of the biggest and notorious fighters and players in all of the game. Players like Alhaitham, Akanada, Goldfish Kim, Arvix, Super Cow, Genie, and many others. Before this KvK, 2489 went from being a very good up-and-coming Imperium kingdom to arguably the best kingdom in all of the game, with one of the most insane migrations in all of history. They started with 23.5 billion power and 5.3 trillion kill points, becoming the second highest kill point alliance in all of Rise of Kingdoms history, just behind Prime 60 GT. However, opposing this mighty kingdom was a kingdom that stood against time itself, 1093, the other best kingdom in the game, the only kingdom that beat 1960 and wins against nearly every single big imperium for the past 6 years. They were challenged yet again to fight against another super imperium kingdom that will attempt to challenge their throne. Yet, this time, 1093 could arguably be in their most complete form ever, still maintaining nearly 2 completely full alliances, the only kingdom in Rise of Kingdoms to be able to accomplish this feat in the modern era. Also, not having any fighting for over the past 8 months, and having a few Krakens like BT Cyborg, Mad Phantom, Etter, and Ghost Rider to be their new swarming power. They entered into the win camp at 33.3 billion power and 4.7 trillion kill points. But then you had one of the most notorious and fierce kingdoms in modern Rise of Kingdoms history, 2377. Although entering into this KvK as a mere shadow of itself, they still housed a few of the more known fighters in the game, specifically the 2 highest power players, Mr. Hope and Wild Lion. And as they downsized, they were placed in Earth Camp with 2890 as an A seed and an up-and-coming low fighting A seed 3331. These 3 kingdoms combined to be 41.8 billion power and 3.7 trillion kill points. And lastly, Washer Camp. This camp consisted of 5 battle-tested and young A seed kingdoms. Let's start with 3517, who entered at 11.8 billion power and 700 billion kill points. Then you had 3285 at 12.1 billion power and 700 billion kill points. Then 3251 at 14 billion power and 1.2 trillion kill points. 3176, who had 10 billion power and 900 billion kill points. And lastly, 2774, who had 13.7 billion power and 1.1 trillion kill points. In total, making this a dangerous camp, who started at 61.5 billion power and 4.5 trillion kill points. And just as quickly as the maps were announced, the diplomacy was sorted. It would be a left versus right KvK. We would pair up with Water Camp to go against 1093 and Earth Camp. It was going to be a mighty KvK. I was entering with 126 million power, 7.9 billion kill points, and 33.7 million dead. The worst stats in the entire kingdom. I knew that this was the KvK I needed to prove that I could compete at the highest level of fighting. And soon it was the day of Pass 4, the day we would face Earth Camp. It was only a few weeks after pre-KvK where Wild Lion and Mr. Hope both pushed to nearly 3.2 billion power, the highest the game has ever seen. This was also the day that I did all my equipment and armament upgrades in preparation for this KvK, while also expertising William Wallace. And just before the pass opened, I was at nearly 20 billion resources each and just over 3,100 days of universal speedups. I was ready to use everything in my first mega KvK. Then the pass 4 opened. It was very clear that we wanted to push everything we had towards Earth Camp, placing strategic alliance fortresses around the sanctuary. Our 2489 and 89 VC alliance fortresses were building in the north and northwest corners of the sanctuary. Meanwhile, Earth Camp responded by placing 3 different alliance fortresses on the eastern side of the sanctuary, Booz, OTR, and GV77. Whilst we had our own 89 NR fortress south of the river, and in response AO77 would place their fortress just south of the sanctuary and right next to the river. But the most interesting placements were our 489 forts and Earth Camp's HR77 force. Both attempted to go behind the established fort line of one another. It was a clear challenge to see who could establish the front line and hold the open field. And at the same time, even more territory battles were being played as Earth Camp would drop forts to slow down our flag line. However, we would counter that by dropping our own alliance fortresses in our flag line to enable us to build faster and at the same time drop fortresses to slow down 2377's flag line. And as all of this was unfolding, I decided to random teleport. And being in the same zone as Wildline and Mr. Hope made me unbelievably nervous, as they are known to swarm cities up to 200 million power. And I was nearly half of that. So I chose my spot carefully and then joined in the fight. I was using 6 marches thanks to me purchasing all the Crystal Tech pop-ups, 5 days straight of the Conqueror's Will bundle and the Mountain Warfare bundle. And for this zone, I used 2 of each troop type: Baichi William Wallace, Luce Alex, Kirsch YSG, ZL Philip, Arthur William, and Achilles Kangam Chan. A lethal 6 march setup. I was helping clear the field near the sanctuary, as many Earth Camp cities were lucky enough to random teleport near the middle structure. This is where I instantly found myself next to Hassan, one of my best friends, and a leader of 3331, the low A seed kingdom in Earth Camp. But after missing my dear moon, it was time for my first Imperium fights to begin, and it quickly turned underwhelming. We completely controlled the field against Earth Camp, and all of our fortresses were looking like they would be completed. Even our daring 489 fortress was looking safe behind their line of Alliance fortresses, and as we continued to dominate the field, I grew bored and wanted to find myself some kills, so I random teleported yet again until I found myself able to protect and defend our building 489 fortress. And I was able to get some kills, yet it was another instance of wasted time, as there was little to no fights. And quickly as time passed, we were able to build all of our fortresses and destroy all apart from 3 of the Earth Camp fortresses. We quickly began to build territory, attempting to surround their fortresses so Earth Camp couldn't expand their territory around the sanctuary, which was a major success. As we completely surrounded them, we began to burn everything, leaving the Alliance fortresses last, as they would always be the toughest to burn. My only fun would come from 2 fights. The first was a battle in the southern parts of the zone where 89 VC territory was pushing towards their AO77 territory. This is where the first true open field fights occurred, as I pushed with our small group here to protect our flags and burn more of Earth. It didn't take long until we grew complete control of this area and subsequently every other area in the zone. This meant that when we began to build towards their territory in the top right of the zone, Earth Camp would use it as a chance to fight us, as they would be able to have good territory with room for their cities. This is where I was able to get the majority of my kills. However, This zone was very brief and disappointing. Earth was in complete shambles due to 2377 not having any capable war leads and denying their campmates from taking charge. So within a day, we essentially completely kicked Earth Camp out from Zone 5. In this zone, I had gained a measly 365 million kill points and 230,000 deads. I also took very positive trades as I was around 120% for this zone. However, this was still completely pathetic, and I despite KP chasing and wanted to save for later fights as I knew it would be much more needed. However, my kingdom would destroy Earth as we would gain in total over 171.4 billion kill points and take 128.4 million deads, whilst Earth only gained 125.7 billion and took 271.1 million deaths. It was a matchup made for its perfect numbers. 1093, the kingdom most known for their 2 alliance kingdom structure, facing a camp of 5 A-seed kingdoms. On paper, it seemed like it might have been a fair fight. However, as soon as the passes would open, the southern fight seemed eerily similar to the 2489 versus Earth Camp war. 1093's field was so dominant that they were able to freely random teleport into the zone to keep water at their pass 4s. Watercamp had to wait until their territory was more established to be able to come out from behind the pass. It was also very easily seen that Watercamp gave up the sanctuary and focused on a defensive alliance fortress hold, where their frontline territory would favor themselves over 1093. This was followed by some elite field fighting, one that saw 1093 struggle at first to totally dominate due to the Watercamp's insane numbers. But Watercamp was holding. My goat Belict was even destroying 1093 in the field, but it was clear that Watercamp was just attempting to give 1093 a hospital bill before the later stages of the KvK, as they played very defensive. Hours into the fighting, the front line was established, and as 1093 pushed in, they meticulously burned each flag, attempting to not take any unnecessary deaths. But this zone was dominated by 2 factors: field fighting and defensive playstyling that the Watercamp focused on. By day 2, 1093 was being focused on multiple counterattacks by Watercamp. They were attempting to flip the script and cause more hospital bills to the Super Imperium. However, as this zone was coming to a close, it was evident that 1093 was toying with Watercamp and not showcasing their full might as they looked to save troops, resources, and speed-ups. In the end, 1093 and Watercamp's Zone 5 fighting was merely an opening act for the main show that would ensue in the later stages. After a very disappointing Zone 5 war where 2489 watched Water fights 1093 with complete jealousy, it was time for us to finally have good fights inside of the altars.
I get those goosebumps every time. I get those goosebumps every time you come around, yeah. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those comments, I'm way too numb, yeah. It's way too dumb, yeah. I get those goosebumps every time you come around, yeah. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those comments, I'm way too numb, yeah. It's way too dumb, yeah. I get those goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw that to the side. Yo. I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around, when you throw that to the side. Yo. I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. 713, 281, yeah, I'm riding. Why they on me? Why they on me? I'm flying. Sipping low key. I'm sipping low key and honest. Find a rider. Pulling up right beside you.
It was the strongest single alliance in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. 2489 facing Earth Camp, which housed the famed alliance of GV77 in the altars. This was a battle of numbers and of strategy, and Earth had the advantage with 214 members against our 145 members. However, based on the strategy Earth used in Zone 5 and on reports, we had the advantage in quality and in strategy. For this fight, I wanted to use just two main marches, Kurseich Zial and Achilles Kangamchen. These two marches not only had my best equipment for both of their troop types, but also my best armaments. And an hour before the altars opened, we took the initiative by setting our first ball in the bottom right of the altar zone. We set up the Haram marches around our ball and waited for 2377 to push us. And by pure numbers, they looked as if they outnumbered us. However, we stood our ground and began to push into their ball. The first altar fights were just beginning. My Achilles march would quickly be down to yellow as we were beginning to slowly get pushed back further and further from our starting points. And after that, we would continue to send out marches after marches in the attempt to push Earth Camp back. However, by the time my second march returned to the fighting, we were able to completely push back to their pass and reball. My trades were unbelievable. At this point, it was also the time where I wanted to switch Kangamchen into the primary commander instead of my Achilles for more healing. And as we waited for the next massive ball fight, each of our sides' arrow towers were firing off against one another, trying to continue to get Haram kill points. But eventually, we decided to fully push into their ball, and you were able to see their superior numbers. It was a strong standstill. Both of our numbers were reducing. However, their numerous arrow towers were thinning our ball out faster, and we were routed. This was what essentially happened for the next hour, of where we would push them, get pushed back, and need to refresh to be able to push Earth back again. However, once the altars was about to open, Earth Camp had a clear advantage as we were getting pushed back and Earth had a massive amount of siege to hold their position. This made it extremely difficult to make a big push. With under 30 seconds left, we attempted to stay in the altar to prevent Earth from taking it, and to attempt to counter them, which did happen. We were pushing Earth out of the altar, but do you see these two marches here? Yeah, those are Earth marches, running around the altar to prevent us from capturing it. Fast marches so that we couldn't catch up to them, which gave them enough time to gain fresh marches and go on a counter attack, which would eventually push us out of the altar and let them occupy it first. However, the fight was still not over. We still believed we could take it back from them. So we kept on pushing, kept sending out marches after marches, trying to turn the tides. I kept getting insane reports until we finally pushed them out of altars. Oh, wait, zoom in closer. Closer? Okay, that's just a bit too close, but there are still more marches just running around in the middle. So we lost all momentum, causing us to reset our push, which ended up becoming a cycle. This continued for about an hour, which was undoubtedly frustrating. However, we were able to block them from gaining honor points, which was a very minor benefit for us. That was until we were finally able to drive out all of these running marches from the altar and capture it. It was a victory, at least until Earth Camp reballed and attempted to push us back out, but this time we were on the defensive and we had the momentum. So as they inched closer and closer, we waited until we finally jumped and pushed them. We kept on pushing until they were all sad faces or retreating behind their pass. And after this failed attempt, they seemed to not be willing to push us anymore in the altars. This altar fight was exactly the fighting I wanted. A long and fun fight. Although we weren't able to capture the altar for the entire time, it was tons of fun and brought out the fighting that we all wanted. During this time, 2489 gained about 6.5 billion kill points, and I personally gained around 38.5 million kill points. Meanwhile, in the south, G5 was fighting 1093. It was an absolute brawl as well. However, 1093 was able to completely control the altars and keep water back to secure the full honor points. This side showcased an amazing new tactic when 1093 came out with only QSH marches that dealt serious instant damage towards G5 and kept them from being able to keep up in the altars. But as the first altars closed, it was evident that it would be the only one that would be contested, as Earth and G5 decided to save resources and speed ups for Kingsland and skip the remaining altars. Past 7s are arguably one of the worst things that Lilith has ever created. However, when you have two of the best kingdoms in all of the game, 2377 and many other AC fighting kingdoms in a single KvK, it was bound to be exhilarating, right? Because as all sides were prepared for one of the biggest past 7s ever, I was prepared for disappointments. 1093 was the only camp to be confident enough to not flag fill their zone to protect against AF drops. Meanwhile, both Earth and Water camps took defensive approaches with their Alliance Fortress placements next to the past 7s as they prepared for both the Mega Imperiums of 2489 and 1093 to be aggressive. It was only minutes away from the past 7 opening. Until now, I had only gained just over 410 million kill points and just 200,000 T5 deaths. I still had over 3,000 days of speed ups from buying VIP shop, barbarian chaining, and plenty of gold chest. This was the final chance to pad my kill points before Kingsland, and I would have a good advantage as I heavily invested into KvK crystal bundles and was already practically max tech at this point, just missing a few technology upgrades that didn't really ultimately matter for this fight. But with only seconds left before the past 7 opened, it was time for war. Our swarmers began to hit their buffing marches, attempting to provide as many buffs as possible to themselves right before swarming the level 7 pass. And thanks to our swarmers' quick fingers, we hit the pass first, and since for this pass there were 6 marches hitting it at the same time, the pass was dropping health fast, and we were the first to take the pass 7 in the entire KvK. Meanwhile, 1093 was able to take the pass 7 down south, and with the 2 passes occupied, both 2489 and 1093 marches bolted towards Earth and Water camps. It was only a matter of time until we routed Earth camp, causing disarray and forcing Earth marches to ball in their territory in 3 different murder balls. One ball in their northern AF, the second in their middle Alliance Fortress, and the smallest ball at the 3331 Booze Alliance Fortress because of territory, essentially causing us to KP chase to find kills. We did set some rallies on their Alliance Fortresses, but these were farm troops and not supported rallies that ultimately traded negative and were never meant to be able to burn either of their Alliance Fortresses touching the past 7. So it was an endless cycle of pushing Earth camp and then reballing to then push them back in the field. It was KP chasing. These are the types of fights I entirely despise. It was so boring that I logged out waiting for more excitement, which would quickly come as right before reset our newly built 89T fort finally built besides water camps past 7, allowing us to come south to finally meet 1093 in real ball fights. But even this was a bit boring and unfulfilling, as only about 20 of our players were able to teleport south at a time. And although fighting 93 did mean that we were able to ball fight, it also meant that 1093 was able to hold their ground. It was a lot more fun than fighting Earth Camp though, but it was still difficult to get a thrilling fight. Which is why when 4 hours passed after reset, we were finally introduced to some excitement when Sun Tzu Prime was released into the game. The brand new open field infantry commander was pretty good. This allowed me to improve my already 2 good infantry marches to 2 elite ones, and as I tested different pairings, it became clear to me that Sun Tzu Prime was a good investment for this account, posting some amazing reports. And for the next few days, as we prepared for Kingsland, it was much of the same. I would push the retreating Earth Camp or 1093, then run away back to our pass or safe territory, and then push out again. It resulted in some great reports, but just boring content. Exactly what past 7s are in Rise of Kingdoms. Boring. But we all knew that it was only a matter of hours left until the Kingsland fight. 1093 and Earth Camp would drop Alliance fortresses in each of their zones. This resulted in 2489 being forced to face 1093, and Earth Camp being forced to face G5. The matchup the entire community desperately wanted. And trust me, this was the matchup that every single fighter in this KvK wanted from the start of the KvK. The matchup that would feed Lilith hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of mere days. It was time for the Kingsland fight. It was the KvK of the year. The ageless kingdom of 1093, powered by a handful of Krakens and an army of active players, more than any single kingdom in the game. They established themselves in the north to go against us, 2489, a brand new mega imperium, with some of the biggest named fighters in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. An alliance that reached over 5 billion kill points, and to this point in the KvK already seen players on the verge of breaking records. Notoriously Al-Haytham, leading his way towards the most single season kill record that was just set by 606's Itachi just a month before this KvK started. This was a fight between two of the best kingdoms in all of history. A test if 1093 can survive another challenge by an emerging super imperium. A test of whether 2489 has enough quality fighters and leadership to take down the most informed 1093 the game has ever seen. Meanwhile, in the south you had another captivating battle. 2377, a juggernaut of a kingdom. After failing to beat 1960, then challenging itself to do a 1v3 KvK, had lost not only many players, but the heart of their own leadership. Thanks to egos, drama, and how time-consuming this game truly is, many of their elite battle-tested fighters and leaders weren't present anymore for this KvK. This resulted in their 8-seed allies in their camp to pick up their slack. You would think a battle-tested and high-powered KP kingdom of 2890 would do this, right? But they seem to just do absolutely nothing, which left 3331, the lowest A seed in this KvK, to lead the camp in Kingsland. Not only that, but ever since the first zone, 3331 would host the sole rally and garrison leaders used in Earth Camp's defensive and offensive pushes, resulting in some amazing reports against 2489 entirely thanks to my farm solo filling in Zone 4. However, their enemy was no slouch. G5 was a battle-tested camp that until this point went up against 1093 and was able to keep themselves from being entirely routed. This was a camp of A-seed kingdoms in a super Imperium KvK. These kingdoms saw the unbelievable challenge ahead of themselves and never backed down. Instead, these players would rise up and be one of the main reasons why this KvK would become the best in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. With the community famous Ruz leading his kingdom in Kingsland, they were filled with players that outperformed any expectations given to them. Even despite many of these kingdoms housing many native accounts with limited commanders, marches, and equipment, they were ready for what was to come next. And what came next was one of the biggest Kingsland fights in all of history. A fight so massive, so brutal, that it not only surpassed any Kingsland record, but also every KvK record. This was the Kingsland fight of the biggest KvK ever.
Yeah, I'm out at Brooklyn. Now I'm down in Tribeca, right next to the Narrow. But I'll be hood forever. I'm the new Sinatra. And since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. I used to cop in Harlem. All of my Dominicanos right there up on Broadway. Brought me back to that McDonald's. Took it to my stash spot, 560 State Street. Catch me in the kitchen like the Simmons whipping pastry. Cruising down A Street, off-white Lexus. Driving so slow with BK is from Texas. Me, I'm out that Bed-Stuy, home of that boy Biggie. Now I live on Billboard, and I brought my boys with me. Say what up to Tata, still sipping my ties. Sitting courtside, Knicks and Nets give me high five. Nigga, I be spiked out, I can trip a referee. Tell by my attitude that I'm most definite. In New
With just seconds before the Pass 8 opened, it was clear that 2489 and 1093 had to play as strategically as possible to gain the most minor advantages in this Kingsland fight. That was why when 1 minute was left before the passes were unsealed, 2489 began to buff their swarming marches. I was prepared with my 7 marches in fully maxed tech. My marches included Sun Tzu, Prime William Wallace, Bai Chi Lu Che, Xiao Herman, Q.S.H. YSG, Arthur Phillip, Kangam Chan Achilles, and Huo Belisarius Prime. These marches would dramatically change throughout the Kingsland fight, but at this point, I had just under 2,900 days in universal speedups, over 15 billion of food, wood, and stone, and 13 billion of gold. I was at 125 million power and 8.9 billion kill points. My goal was to reach 12 billion through this Kingsland fight scene alone, but as I level 2'd my infantry set gloves, the Pass 8 was seconds away from being unsealed, and within 40 seconds of the pass being attackable, the pass fell, and we were the first camp into Kingsland. We instantly started to build, pushing our field to support our front line flags against 1093. We knew that if we were able to withstand 1093's numbers early on, acquire as much territory as possible, and settle in, we would have accomplished all of our early set goals in the first opening hours. But to do this, we needed strong field support at our building flags. Our field collided with 1093's numbers. It was quality versus quantity. It was evident that 1093's numbers were just so overwhelming, but our players were built on quality, and our quality was holding firm. But it was only a matter of time before 1093's numbers prevailed, and we needed to refresh. We began to be pushed back inch by inch. I had to keep sending new and fresh marches out to help our war front stabilize against 1093's ball. They were ferocious, pushing us deeper and deeper into our own territory. At the same time, they were able to swarm our frontline flags due to their strong field presence. It seemed that their insane numbers were just everywhere at the start, keeping us from building as fast as possible and 1093 being able to push their territory more aggressively. They also took advantage of spamming Kahars and Lohars all around our territory and flag path, as these mobs blocked us from teleporting our cities onto our territory. Because why would Lilith want us to do that, right? Anyways, our main objective was to settle into Kingsland with our growing territory. Our ball moved from building flag to building flag with the attempt to protect them from 1093's sea of marches. But as the territory expanded, I was able to teleport right next to De Ace, a very talented fighter who had the Frost Howl of Sanctum, which gave me important fighting buffs, a very lucky teleport to say the least. This allowed me to push the field hard close to my city, and as our field collided with 1093's, it seemed that we were able to push them slowly further back than before. I completely dove into 1093's territory to push their field back, but this left my marches very low, which gave me the idea to just let them die and send fresh new marches. And as my new marches set out towards the front lines, I checked what was happening in the south. When the passes opened in the south, our allies' water camp was ready with their massive numbers to take on Earth. This would be the first time the two predominantly A-seed camps face off against one another. The war between Water and Earth camp could be the most deciding factor in the entire KvK, as if one side gives up first, then it could create a complete advantage for the other side. And to be honest, these are the camps that would give up first, as 1093 and 2489 were locked and loaded for a long siege against one another in this Kingsland fight. However, as the passes open, both sides would compete in a race for who takes the pass down faster. And just moments before Water Camp, GV77 would accomplish this feat. This gave them only seconds to be able to place flags down in Kingsland before Water Camp, which allowed them to be ultra aggressive with flag placements. But all this would be dependent on the field battle, as the two sides' fighting marches collided into one another. These were insane amounts of numbers of players, Water with 4 more, and it was evident as they started to push back Earth Camp. And this is when disaster struck for Earth Camp, as they were pushed back from their building flag, and it lagged behind Water's flag building, which meant that Water was able to swarm it. And Earth was not able to get a garrison into the building flag, meaning that Herman Prime was the garrison. This led the flag to be quickly swarmed down and utterly destroyed, swinging positive momentum for Water. And as the ball fighting continued, Water completely destroyed Earth's first ball. This domination of the field led them to swarm this first flag, which we will never know if they got the burn, since Earth Camp pushed their field towards Water's emerging ball, and this handsome streamer pushed them all the way back to Zone 4 just by his charming looks alone. I mean, look at this stunning Mongolian prince. But what happened next was Water and Earth Camp struggling to outbuild one another, whilst Water had to deal with the 2-3 billion power players constantly trying to swarm their flags. It was an insane battle as Water was able to get a burn off in the south and maintained great field control. The biggest fight so far were the flags just south of the Zig, where Earth was 1 flag ahead. However, with Water's field there, they were attempting to cut off Earth from reaching the Zig. It was the most strategically important battle yet, and both sides sent all their field there. And whilst Water kept Earth's field back to protect their own building flag, Hope and Lion went under and rushed to swarm Water's building flag. Thankfully, Water Camp responded swiftly, which allowed them to safely build the flag. This meant the Kingsland territory looked like this, with the north of the Kingsland in a complete stalemate, as both 2489 and 1093 territory was split straight down the middle. Meanwhile, Water Camp looked to have taken a way better start, as they were able to just break through the south side. And as the territory was settled, Water Camp was able to burn flags that were not located next to Hope or Lion, like this flag, where it took nearly 30 minutes to finally get the flag to burn. And with Water looking strong, let's check on how we are doing in the north against 1093. We were standing our ground against 1093 despite some early burns they got on us previously. It was massive ball fights that created a numerical advantage for 1093 against us. However, it appeared as if our quality was prevailing as we kept 1093 back. But field fighting was the main focus for the entirety of Kingsland. It was so much fun. This KvK went from us chasing kills in Earth's territory to having some of the best ball fights ever in Rise of Kingdoms KvK history. Against 1093, we had 3 main fighting areas: the area in the furthest north, the middle, and then around the Zig. The territory was split almost evenly down the middle. I was stationed in the middle of the territory fights, trying to push back the flag area where the legendary Ghost Rider was at. 1093 made rallying these flags very difficult, as we would gain field, but their marches would pop out from cities and instantly swarm our rallies, causing chaos amongst our mist, and 1093's field to be able to push back up to the flag. This would go on for some time as they were able to solidly defend this area. We would also see some insane reports. However, a report like this would come from areas where the legendary and my dear friend Plato Gaming was fighting. This area would see much of the same. We would beat back 1093's field to be able to send our rally and begin a lethal swarm. However, 1093's marches would find a way to not only fill their flag, but to swarm our rallies. It's also hoped that the 1 billion power Kraken BT Cyborg was at this flag protecting it. Meanwhile, in the north, you guessed it, it was the complete same. However, this time Water Camp was able to provide field assistance due to them being able to completely control the field against Earth Camp. This not only made gaining an upper hand in the field a lot easier against 1093, but provided support to hit any swarmers hitting our rallies. It was until about 7 hours after the opening of Kingsland until we were able to finally get some important frontline flag burns after the initial opening. However, it wasn't just all the momentum for us, as 1093 was able to get some key burns as some of our field was focused in different areas. But in the south, it was pretty even as both sides got some vital burns on each other's flags. It was the beginning of the first day's stalemate. For hours, 2489 and 1093 was locked in a complete stalemate as some flags did get burned on both sides. However, it basically stayed the exact same for 24 hours. However, the strategy would drastically change between the two super imperiums as we would both focus on going to help our allies fight in the south, rather than focus on fighting one another. Our troops going south was due to a reaction based on 1093 field moving there. It was also because Watercamp was getting pushed back just south of the Zig, and their aggressive flags here were getting burnt. Thanks to our field, Watercamp was able to defend themselves a bit easier, but it was hard to be sustainable. So our leadership made the call to push south with our flags, causing Water to have to delete their territory for us to be able to flag fight Earth for the first time since Zone 5. By the time day 2 of Kingsland rolled around, it was as chaotic as ever. This time it was due to the fact that all concentration was focused south of the Zig, as both 2489 and 1093 wanted to aid their allies against one another. The aim was to prepare both sides for the Zig opening, which was tomorrow. Both sides knew that the territory between 2489 and 1093 would be very slow to change. However, in the south with weaker kingdoms, territory was easier to burn and cut through. Both sides wanted a small advantage for refreshing marches around the Zig. It was a total bloodbath. All camps were merging together to create the biggest fighting so far in this KvK, as 93 and Earth Camp continued to target Water Camp. Earth Camp even made a counterattack for us and our allies harder, as Mr. Hope and Wildline cities were right here, meaning that these flags would be very difficult and costly to burn. Even during double rallies and elite swarms, we found it increasingly difficult to burn these flags. That is because of the sheer amount of troops Hope and Wildline had to be able to solo fill these flags. This was when we focused on burning flags that Hope and Wildline weren't next to and would find difficult to fill. When we focused on this flag right underneath the Zig, it dropped quickly due to its distance away from the two Goliaths. It was hours of intensive field fighting. It was pretty balanced. Although Earth and 1093 were getting more burns as we were forced to play more defensive, but whenever a flag was taken down, we would just drop another flag until it was fully built and go through the same cycle again. By 20 UTC, the only real change in territory was a territory expansion for 2489 around the Zig to continue to support Watercamp. It was still a complete deadlock, but by the time reset struck on the second day, it was mayhem as 1093's paid war leader, the great GT Alano, was online and applying pressure to all fronts. This caused some of our attention to be shifted towards 1093 in the north, where I attempted to help our endeavors in the north when we wanted to build a flag to apply more pressure to 1093, a flag that eventually failed. But it is vital to notice that I was off territory, which prompted one of my best friends from one of my favorite kingdoms, 3331, Jack, to rally me.
We like candy cane. Pop it, let it bang. All the ones, all the James Bonds on the mantle. All the dogs, low key, right behind me in the phantom. Never go, dip on the set, stay Santana. Run it back, turn the lights on when I hit up Green Lantern. Fought the bras, fought the dogs down to Atlanta. In the cut, in Medusa, lay low, yeah, I might be. Roll up, tell me calm down when I'm moving high speed. If I send one, need to text back, cause you know what I need. Oh, please. Oh, me. Oh, my. We've been moving for some time.
This was also the day that our Krakens were solo filling these flags, right underneath the Ziggurat. It was absolutely insane. Players like Akanada, Goldfish Kim, Arvik's accounts, and many more were solo filling these flags to keep them alive. But by the time day 3 was about to start and the Ziggurat was about to open, the territory looked like this. The main change being the south of the Zig, where it went from this to this, after some crucial burns by 2489 and D5. Besides that, the biggest change was likely the most lethal in all of KvK. It was the elephant Earth Camp introduced into Kingsland. Okay, all jokes aside, all that mattered now was the opening of the Zig, because surely whoever would be able to take this structure would automatically win the KvK. Right? The Ziggurat opening was the fight all of the Rise of Kingdoms community looked forward to. The community believed that once the Ziggurat was captured, the KvK winners would be decided, and everyone else would just go home. Throughout the history of Rise of Kingdoms, there were some insane fights for the opening of the Ziggurat. However, the only recent and significant fight that I remembered was the KvK that involved DK18 and 1256 over 1 year ago. Besides that, Ziggurat fights in modern Rise of Kingdoms were undoubtedly rare. However, this KvK was like no other KvK ever before. The raw strength and ability that 2489 possessed was unimaginable. Meanwhile, the months of no fighting gave 1093 the abilities to sustain a siege like no other. At the same time, Water Camp's sheer size of players enabled them to be able to keep up with Earth Camp, the camp that housed the two biggest spenders in the entire game, Mr. Hope and Wildline, which gave not only the players in 2377, but now their camp, the ability to leech gold chests for speed ups. All this meant that this Ziggurat fight would be the most brutal fight ever seen for a structure in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. This is the fight for the Ziggurat, the most important structure in any single KvK, and it was in the middle of two of the most ferocious fighting kingdoms in all of the game. Both sides prepared for what was soon to be inevitable, the battle inside of the Zig. With around 10 minutes left until the Ziggurat would open, both sides rushed their troops forward towards the center of the structure, attempting to set themselves up for better field advantage to defend their swarmers to capture the Zig. This was the time where both sides were off territory, meaning there would be no alliance buffs for any sides, making it solely dependent on quality and numbers. Within moments, it was all sides pushing. The biggest field battle would commence, and it would only get bigger. Minutes before the Zig would open, 1093 and Earth Camp would have immense field numbers, as 2489 would take the position of being inside the center of the Ziggurat, whilst our great allies pushed the massive numbers combining to reinforce the enemies in the bottom right Ziggurat entrance. Both sides' main goal was to push the other side out of the center of the structure, so when the bubble for the Ziggurat vanished, it would allow for the swarmers to freely hit the Zig and for the field to be able to kill the guardians that spawned to protect it and heal it. But gaining the field was unbelievably difficult, and with minutes left until the Zig would open, we made our hardest push yet in the attempt to push back 1093 as far as possible so our swarmers could take the field. And with our push driving back 1093 and Earth Camp was successful enough to buy time for our swarm, it was only a matter of damage output to be able to take the Zig down, as we had to kill the Ziggurat before these guardians healed the structure. This made it nearly impossible to do, as 1093 was purposely allowing the top right guardians to heal the structure to prevent us from taking it. A tactic that completely worked, as we soon would end our swarm and return to trying to push back the field, as due to the focus on taking the Ziggurat, our field was pushed back just slightly. So it was back to pushing 1093 on the top of the structure and then pushing Earth in 1093 on the bottom. It was meticulous field fighting, and my commanders were completely cooking. Kangan-chan was ideal for the scenario, as his healing was just unbelievable. So unbelievable that he stayed longer on the field than my dad did in my childhood. But once our second swarm happened, the field didn't really change, as the two sides were pretty split in the middle. However, our plan was to nosedive our marches into 1093's top right side to either push them back or mainly to attempt to take out any guardian spawning. It was almost working, but it continued to fail as we were not able to capture the Ziggurat during this swarm, causing us to continue to focus on attempting to control the field, but it seemed like there were way more from 1093 in Earth Camp than before. We were still holding our ground, but it felt like we weren't making any promising pushes towards dominating the field. And 40 minutes after the first fight started, 1093 would turn the tables by swarming the Ziggurat for the second time. And thanks to some unlucky spawns for the Guardians, they were able to take it down before the Guardians held it, meaning the Ziggurat was 1093's. Well, this didn't really mean anything because 1093 had to defend the Zig for 8 hours continuously, because if they lose it for even a minute within that time frame, we would be able to reset the timer and continue to attack the Ziggurat before it shielded for 3 days. So the timer was on. We had to keep pushing for the next 8 hours to take the Zig. We first attempted to take the Zig with an infantry rally. However, controlling the field was extremely difficult, and 1093 repeatedly dove in to swarm the rally. The second rally we sent out came way later and at a different angle in the hopes that we would be able to reinforce it easier with our farm troops, since it was closer to our main northern territory. During this rally, it was still very difficult to maintain it, as it was much closer to the top right of the Ziggurat, where 1093 main forces were coming in from. However, after a 30-minute rally, it was evident that we needed to focus on controlling the field and try to push out 1093 from the top right corner, as we weren't able to maintain the rally this time either. And minutes after that rally, Earthcamp broke through our bottom side field and began to flank our top marches, fully pushing out our entire field from the Ziggurats. This led us to having to reball and push back into the structure, the same structure that is now in 1093's territory, which provided them aligned stat bonuses. Also, can we take a moment and look at this disgusting frame? Look how many siege marches there are. This is absolutely vile for how many sieges there are. Anyone that used sieges here should rethink their Rise of Kingdoms accounts. Anyway, we had to dive into 1093 in Earthspawn as we felt it was a pinnacle time for us to be able to push, as they were overextended from their reinforcements and their sieges. It was also our marches being fresh, which could mean that it was a way for us to push deeper into their field to wipe out their sieges. We kept on making great gains. Even when fresh 1093 marches arrived, we were able to push 1093 back to the start of the top right entrance. However, not much happened for the next 2.5 hours. Yeah, 2.5 hours, as we would continue to just pursue pushing here to find a way to push back 1093 in Earth to capture the Ziggurat. But we weren't able to do so, as 1093 was able to sustain their field marches. So with 46 minutes left before the Ziggurat would close for the next 2.5 days, we had to come up with a new plan. A plan that could set momentum into our corner and take the Zig once and for all. So our war leads called all marches to return home and be refreshed. We then were told to send all marches to Marker 1, a point left of the Ziggurat. And as the seconds went down before the shield would be activated, both sides awaited for us to make our move. With about 31 minutes left before the shield activated, we began to move from the cities towards the Storm Citadel in the bottom left corner of the Zig, and then slowly moved closer and closer to the enemy's ball until we were given the orders to fully push in. This was cinema. Up until this point, this fight was the biggest moment in all of KvK. Arguably the single biggest open field fighting moment ever in a KvK, and it was occurring in real time. We kept pushing, trying to break the combined 1093, 2377, and 3331 front line of marches. It felt like because of the sheer amount of marches, I didn't have to worry about getting targeted, as it was practically impossible for my march to be singled out. However, my weaker marches were thinning out slowly, mainly my Arthur and Joan marches because of AoE. But then I was told to fully push in to send fresh marches in the top left area of the Zig, so I sacrificed my remaining marches to do exactly that. By the time I got to the top left corner of the Zig, we were developing another strong front, but it seemed the exact same situation we were in before this last push, where we attempted to push on the top and bottom of the Zig simultaneously. This was partly different as I was able to target sieges much easier this time, but the time was ticking. We really needed to push as hard as possible and try to break the enemy's strong and established front lines of marches. But sadly, it was too late. The Ziggurat was officially shielded for the next 2.5 days, marking the victory for 1093 and their allies. Furthermore, there were some KvK announcements marking the end of the KvK. It was loads of fun. Days of non-stop fighting, but the loss of the Zig was the cutting point. This meant that after 3 days of Kingsland, I gained over 830 million kill points and over 500,000 T5 deaths. I expected much more, way longer fights, and potentially even us being able to win the KvK, or at least lose through zeroing ourselves. Not when a rubbish A-seed kingdom tells us that we lost. A kingdom that only is good because of the fact it recruited Itachi's second account. An account that migrated mid-KvK from a kingdom that didn't do absolutely anything this KvK, as they were led by the low A-seed kingdom 3331, as their leadership was too incompetent to be involved in an Imperium KvK. But when this KvK says 2489 lost, we truly lost, guys. And with that, this was how I survived the first 3 days of Kingsland, because if you think some dogshit A-seed kingdom gets to decide when we lose, then you're completely mistaken. Us losing the Ziggurat did suck, but we were able to shift our focus towards flags, and it didn't take long until we had to defend the southern Ziggurat flags. Players like Warfort, Goldfish Kim, The Ace, and Min Tam were keeping this flag field until our open field was able to break through to assist them. It took a huge effort as the flag was getting double rallied and swarmed by 2377 and 1093 players, and for 20 minutes, these heroic players, and I'm sure many others, were able to keep this flag alive and filled with infantry. After being able to fend off both sides from this flag, we were able to launch our counterattack, this time focusing on 2377, as we wanted to keep assisting Water Camp to push Earth Camp back. This flag was the lone flag that would separate 1093 from gaining another front against us, but this time on the bottom of the Ziggurat. And thanks to a Water Camp rally and swarm by 2489 players, this flag went down fast. Our players were far from giving up. We wanted to win this KvK, and we were willing to give everything for it. By day 4, we made some insane progress, from being able to burn and build flags that gained us lots of territory, and by lots, I mean minuscule territory, because in this KvK, one flag difference in 12 hours is a huge change. But the main difference was seen in 2 moves. The first, 1093 moving more south in the attempt to take less pressure off from Earth Camp. This was to try and make 2489 fight 1093 and keep Water and Earth fighting one another. However, thanks to great planning, 2489 was able to drop an Alliance Fortress days earlier that enabled us to build to assist the fight against Earth Camp, keeping this territory completely separated from 1093 territory. This was seen as a major success, as within just this day alone, we were able to completely push Earth Camp back to the first level 8 pass. It was appearing as if Earth Camp was going to be kicked out of Kingsland in a mere few hours, but this brought up huge problems. 1093 was able to push us from any and all angles. 2489 is a very strong kingdom, but the limitations we faced, particularly in this area, was the fact that we were all over Kingsland with cities and not able to consolidate many of our field marches at particular areas. Long marches and limited teleport spots really restricted our ability to keep 93 at bay. But thanks to many of our players' ability to keep flags full, we were able to buy ourselves way more time than what we should have had. However, we kept on focusing with our attempts to push against Earth Camp, as their territory was continuing to diminish further and further into the bottom right of Kingsland. And by day 5 of Kingsland, we were able to nearly fully push Earth Camp out, as they were only able to retain little territory here and new territory in the top right of the map behind 1093's front line with us. But before we get into day 5, my favorite time was being able to buy this avatar frame. Yes, I spent $10 on a dragon, but look at it, it's so cool. Day 5 looks as if Earth was mere hours away from surrendering. Our focus was against 1093, trying to apply as much pressure as possible. With Earth retreating, we knew we had all the momentum on our side. We had to press 1093 as best as possible before they tried any type of counterattack. But as vital of a time as it was, this is where I believe we made our biggest mistakes. See, our first mistake was that our main focus was around the Ziggurat. Although it could be said that pushing these flags would be beneficial in keeping 1093 from having space for the next Ziggurat fight, our main focus, in my opinion, should have been in the north, to burn flags closest to 1093's pass 8. This would have given a great chance to threaten the vital flags they relied on. However, I think the biggest mistake in this Kingsland was made at this time as well, as we let Water Camp get split between trying to push out Earth Camp and now having a front with 1093, a front where we couldn't really help them. This would become a major issue. When the evening of day 5 came around, Earth and 1093 all got online and made their last counterattack. This was it. If we were able to repel this last charge, then we would surely put a nail in the coffin and be able to slowly push out 1093. However, if we allowed Earth Camp to gain any territory and re-establish themselves back into Kingsland, then we could see disaster as Water Camp was beginning to be on fumes. This was the deciding factor, the pinnacle moment of this Kingsland, of this KvK. This could be what dictates who wins and loses the greatest KvK in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. It was the final days of Kingsland. We all knew it was only a matter of time before one side folded. The map looked as if it was over. Earth Camp was on the verge of being fully pushed out of Kingsland. Meanwhile, we were able to make good progress against 1093 as we burned and built flags along the front lines next to the Ziggurat. By 21 UTC, the entire scenario would change as Water Camp would be pushed by both 1093 and Earth Camp, resulting in many of their flags being turned ablaze. And 1093 would bring online their fleet of pilots to push. It was ferocious. 1093's field, followed by rallies and swarms, was lethal and resulted in our flags falling. But many times we were able to prevail, and we would go on the offensive, attempting to keep our momentum and take pressure away from all the focusing our allies received in the south. By reset, it seemed as if the pressure and coordination that 1093 put on 2489 was very effective, as they would continue to push the field and get vital burns. Most importantly, burns in the bottom right of Kingsland, where Earth was able to gain momentum and be able to push territory to stage their comeback into the zone. We all believed that the end was near. We all believed that one side had to break. It was some of the most brutal fighting we all had ever experienced. 6 days straight of fighting. Non-stop fighting. Yet it was still not over, as the second Ziggurat fight would commence within hours, as the Ziggurat would open once again, and it would give us the chance to steal it from 1093. However, by the time the Ziggurat was about to open, the territory dramatically changed. So much so that 1093 was able to help Earth push all the way back to their other pass 8. This dramatically changed the outlook of KvK, as Water was running on fumes. However, if we could take and secure Ziggurat, then we might be able to swing the momentum back to us permanently. But it was time for the two sides to finally fight once again in the middle of the Ziggurat. It was the biggest KvK in all of Rise of Kingdoms. By this point, records were already destroyed. More on that later. But on the left side, it was 2489 in Water Camp. 2489 was positioned in the top left closest to the massive ball of 1093 and Earth Camp players. Amongst the mix, 1093 deployed again one of the most disgusting tactics we've ever seen. Anyways, this was two masterminds fighting against one another. For 2489, it was the established TDS group that helped lead kingdoms in KvK, led by Maimer, Pika, and Mo. On the other side, you had leaders like Nico, Shadow, Orchide, and the legendary GT Alano. Every ball movement was specific and meticulous. It was a standstill until 1093's ball moved with less than 4 minutes left before the shield ended, pouncing on 2489's sieges. You see, 2489 shifted their ball to the north of the Zig, attempting to outflank them by moving behind 1093's ball. This resulted in 1093 and Earth Camp marches splitting, as a number of their marches would chase kill points to the left, hitting our sieges, and the remaining marches going to the right to meet our 2489 murder ball. But as all this was going on, Water Camp...
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
who hasn't been focused on had their opportunity to strike as they pushed towards the defenseless siege that 1093 and Earth Camp left behind in the middle of the Ziggurat. It was total slaughter. It was free Haram KP. 1093 and Earth Camp marches tried to fall back to defend their flank, but it was already too late. Water was utterly annihilating what was left at the Ziggurat, and as they pushed further north, 2489 held their ground, continuing to take the brunt of 1093 and Earth Camp's murder ball, whilst Water Camp and fresh 2489 marches pushed from the center of the Ziggurat on the backside of their ball. It was a tactic that worked brilliantly, giving us ample space to be able to capture the Zig with a rally and not worry about any possibilities of reinforcements from the enemy side. We were even able to send a double rally with Water, however the timing would be quite off, but even despite that timing, the crazy players of 2489 just started to swarm the Ziggurat before the rally even reached, and before the enemies were even able to attack the rally or swarmers, it was far too late. The Ziggurat was now ours. Now the clock was ticking. We had to secure the structure for the next 8 hours during 1093's uptime and following a period of major success for Earth Camp. Surprisingly, after many attempts to crack our newly formed defensive lines to the entrance of the Zig, 1093 and Earth Camp would pivot towards burning flags. Both sides were able to get burns, however it was becoming increasingly difficult to burn 1093 flags and keep our less strategically placed flags from being burnt. There was no big last second push from the enemies for the Zig, and by the time the Ziggurat was locked and secured, the territory was seemingly locked for the night. Once the 1 week anniversary came, the territory fighting was seemingly the same as when it was first established 1 week ago. All sides were giving everything they had left in an attempt to deal the deciding blows. In the north, both sides were finding ways to burn one another, but G5 was slowly being burnt back. The constant and continuous swarms and solo filling from Mr. Hope and Wildline are very difficult to handle for the group of A-seed kingdoms. Meanwhile, 2489 was preoccupied trying to hold back and counter 1093. The moment we attempt to help Water would be the moment 1093 would pivot their focus to aid Earth after gaining decisive burns on our own northern flags. In the last attempts to try and push 93, Water would send marches north to help support our field, but a combination of overwhelming numbers from 1093 and us being spread out made our defense attempts extremely difficult. During our hold, Cortex and I were able to swarm 2 ungarrisoned flags, but in retrospect, this did nothing to stop the bleeding that was occurring. The greatest KvK ever in Rise of Kingdoms history was bound to come to an end. Water Camp consisted of 5 A-seed kingdoms with very very few high power players and high level spenders. This was a KvK many of them did everything they possibly could do in the attempts to win. Many of their players from every camp gave everything they had just for this fight. However, being in a camp that barely had any spending was one of the ultimate reasons why Watercamp would surrender. Following the visible retreat of Watercamp, many players from 2489 saw the writing on the walls and decided, unless told otherwise, it was time to save for the next KvK. And very quickly, leadership notifications would alert us to our own return to Zone 4 in the beginning stages of recovering for the next KvK. It was such an amazing KvK. I personally never had more fun in a single KvK. This alone set off multiple records that might never be reached ever again in Rise of Kingdoms. For starters, this KvK would break the record for most kill points gained in total and the most deads reached in total. For kingdom-based rewards, 2489 would be the first and only kingdom to ever reach 1 billion kill points gained in a single KvK. Along with kill points, 2489 would set the single kingdom dead record as we reach 1.5 billion deads, a monstrous number. On a more individual note, players like BT Cyborg and Goldfish Kim would have beaten the single individual KvK KP gain record, as Cyborg would get over 24.5 billion kill points and Goldfish Kim gained over 26 billion kill points. Go check out Goldfish Kim's account through my video, but Al-Haytham would absolutely destroy the kill point record Itachi set just 1 month before this KvK was set off, as he would reach over 32.4 billion kill points, beating the old record by almost 10 billion kill points. Al-Haytham is one of the craziest fighters ever seen in Rise of Kingdoms and deserves so much more recognition for such an insane feat. 32.4 billion kill points is unbelievable. And lastly, the craziest feat of them all. Following this insane KvK, 489 would be the first ever alliance to reach 6 billion kill points in Rise of Kingdoms history. This is a kingdom that was built on the best of the best. And then there's just me in the corner. And speaking of records, I would break my own single KvK kill point gain record by reaching over 3.7 billion kill points. This was split between 8.8 million T4 kills and over 181.1 million T5 kills. Over 3.2 billion of this kill points would just be from Kingsland, and the majority from the early days. Sadly, in the later days, I had family medical issues and obligations I had to personally attend to and couldn't be online like I was in the first 3 days of fighting. Nonetheless, I went from under 8 billion kill points on my account to now 11.7 billion kill points. I was a bit disappointed for not hitting 12 billion, but I will push even harder for our next KvK. Along with kills, I gained over 3.7 million deads, all of which are T5, increasing from 33.8 million deads in total on my account at the start of the KvK to now 37.6 million deads. This is how I survived the deadliest KvK in all of Rise of Kingdoms history, using over 71 billion resources, thousands of days of speed-ups, millions of dead soldiers, thousands of dollars being spent on bundles and KvK technology, and hundreds of hours of fighting and hundreds more grinding to be able to compete in this type of KvK. This is a story that I tried to share everything I possibly could. Now, as I recorded, this is over 2 hours long, and I had to cut a lot of things out. But I want to give a special shout out to many of my friends in 2489, players like Popa Boba and Sky. Grazie mille a entrambe per il vostro aiuto. To other friends like Duke, Zhao Zia, Ihara, Haiding, Snipes, Jake, Ogsa, Tyr, Gojo, Habibi Hassan, and even Rezo. Lots of love to my best friends who were even my enemies this KvK, like all my amazing friends in Kingdom 3331. Friends I thought I would never see in an Imperium KvK, but handled themselves unbelievably well. And the 2 friends I have in 1093. Meanwhile, thanking our allies Watercamp for being such amazing kingdoms that surpassed any in all expectations and stayed fighting as long as possible against Imperiums. to my dear supporters who subscribe to my channel, and to those that are a member to this channel, to Goose and Lil Bro for always supporting me, and lastly to the leadership of 2489. Although it was a loss, this was the best KvK ever and reignited my love for Rise of Kingdoms. And to Arvix, the great king of 2489, for showing how much you love not only the game, but the community and the friends you made in this spectacular kingdom. I am very excited for our future KvKs and can't wait to make them even more special. Remember, this video was made for entertainment purposes. Yes, I wasn't able to cover absolutely everything, but I hoped I showed how amazing this KvK truly was. Thank you all for watching.